probably what I connect to most in the material in Cressida Cowell's book to start with was just what it is to be an outsider. So I think that's what Hiccup is. He's just, as much as he wants to assimilate and live up to expectations, whether it's his father's or his friends or his society, he's just ill-equipped to ever do it. Maybe when you realize that you can stop trying to change who you are and live up to other people's expectations, maybe you embrace that thing that makes you weird or different or you see as a weakness, because it might be a strength in disguise. It might be that thing that allows the world to change around you.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. In this episode, a young man forms a bond with a supposedly ferocious beast in director Dean DeBlois' fantasy adventure, How to Train Your Dragon. This live-action remake of the animated hit tells the story of an inventive young Viking named Hiccup, who must face a test and fight his village's deadly draconic nemesis. But instead of battling the dragon, Hiccup befriends it, and their bond becomes the key to forging a new future as an ancient threat endangers them all. In addition to the live-action How to Train Your Dragon, DeBlois' other directorial credits include the animated features Lilo and Stitch, the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, and the documentaries 10 and Sigur Rós Heima. Following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, DeBlois spoke with director Phil Lord about filming How to Train Your Dragon. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Give it up for Dean and his crew and all those amazing names you just saw. My goodness. Oh,
Many of us. Yeah.
That movie made me cry so much. I texted you yesterday. I caught the movie again. It's beautiful. It made me cry. And I walked out and all I wanted to talk about was shapes. Because we are both filmmakers who started our careers in animation. And this, more than any live action movie I've ever seen, is dedicated to beautiful silhouettes and beautiful shapes. And every pair of horns is different. Tell this wonderful crowd about how you were able to take your animation background, which is so, the animated version of this movie is so beautifully rendered, and bring it into live action in spite of all of the things like gravity and space and time, and retain that level of, I guess, draftsmanship.
Wow. Well, I've never heard anyone comment on the shapes.
I'm a big dingling. I'm sorry. You guys are stuck with me for half an hour.
But I think it's probably part of what drove me into the film business is just I loved to draw and I wanted to be a comic book artist. And so that led to animation, which led to live action. And so there's just sort of this natural attraction to silhouettes and shot design. And I certainly can't take credit for all of it, but I was mindful of it as we were making the movie. And so in talking to Bill Pope, our cinematographer, or our camera operators, or Lindsay Pugh, our costume designer, or Dominic Watkins, our production designer, it was always about like how do we really present these silhouettes that are compelling, and as the camera moves around, they sort of change and give us a constant variety of like really beautiful single images. And every time that we hit it, I would often say to Bill Pope or to Karsten, our A-camera operator, I'd say, wow, that's Ridley Scott beautiful. Like that.
Wow.
That's always the aim. It's like, if you can get to Ridley Scott beautiful, then you're doing something. But yeah, I think in translation, it's just, there are elements of that animated movie that are imprinted on my mind. And I think they're kind of indelible for the fans that know and love those movies. And a lot of it has to do with the character design in silhouette, and that's what's cosplayable. And that's, we tried to migrate that over, even though the costumes themselves are different.
Well, and also the process, to me, like, of building an animated movie starts with drawing and it goes into sculpting. And before you really start making the movie, you've spent so much time telling the story with how somebody, what their shape is like. Like, it's a huge no-no in cartoons to have like every character the same height and build. It's like you look at that, you go, that's a lineup that's stinky poo. What you want is like a lineup that looks like, you know, the stock market right after Trump got elected. So that, and I think that the movie really accomplishes that. And I'm like, oh my God, the pads, what the furs, the things that you guys had to do to bring rigor to that process, I thought were really impressive. Are there other things that you discovered, you know, bringing your filmmaking eye and heart into a live action process that sort of surprised you? Like, wait, you guys don't do this thing? Could we do that, please? You know, you started your life as a story artist, right? And so, and this movie feels like every frame is storyboarded. I'm not sure that it is, but tell me about like what things you learned in animation that you brought to the live action experience.
Early on, I know that when we were prepping the film, it seemed natural language for me to pull out a sheet of paper and just sketch what I meant. And it turned out, like, certainly on our crew, that was not a shared language. And so it almost seemed surprising, like you were doing a magic trick when you'd pull out a sheet of paper and like, this is the island, this is the village, you know, this is where the secret cove is. And it just became this light bulb moment. And that sketch ended up being photocopied, you know, in large and pinned up in everyone's room because it became a map for something that we were all discussing and yet had different ideas as to what the reality of that was. So having drawing ability has certainly benefited me. It's obviously a given when you're working in animation, but I think in the world of live action, it is picture says 1,000 words is kind of turns out to be true because you can just slap a sheet of paper down and either storyboard something quickly or draw out something that will then be handed off to a concept artist or the production designer and the art team, and it becomes reality much more quickly. So yeah, I guess I have many disadvantages as a rookie live action director, but one of the things I could bring into it was a knowledge of working with animators, working in CGI, and also just the animation background of storyboarding and working visually.
You know who else does a lot of drawings in pre-production? Ridley Scott. I said this to you in the wings. Like, I came out of this movie and thought, it's a movie about drawing. You know, you have a protagonist whose first reaction to seeing this wounded dragon is to start drawing it. You have, and to me, and not to me, this is the thing you learn in art school, is drawing is really the act of looking. It's really the artifact of looking. And what I find so interesting about this movie is that it is about somebody looking at somebody else deeply and understanding them, and that becoming their strength. Actually, they become the greatest warrior ever because they were just able to observe this other creature and figure out what made them work. I mean, talk to me about drawing as your access point into writing, filmmaking. To me, this movie, I imagine this movie is really personal to you. And it really feels like it's advocating for people to look closer at one another. Do you feel that? Did I get it right?
Yeah, it certainly did. I think probably what I connect to most in the material in Cressida Cowell's book to start with, and certainly the take that Chris Sanders and I mined for the animated movie was just what it is to be an outsider. And because I was one of those kids, I endured the same sort of mockery and ridicule. I would rather retreat to my bedroom and draw and read comic books and sort of write my own fan fiction and act out stories with my action figures than to engage in sports and to just never feel like I was part of that popular crowd. So I think that's what Hiccup is. He's just, as much as he wants to assimilate and live up to expectations, whether it's his father's or his friends or his society, he's just ill-equipped to ever do it. That was a personality trait that we learned from working on Mulan together. Like that was kind of what cracked the code with that movie. It's just, this girl isn't trying to find an escape out of the life that she's burdened with. She's not looking for, the idea of impersonating a male soldier and joining the army wasn't an escape from anything. She was doing it ultimately because she loved her father. And the best setup for that character is somebody who wants to make her family proud. She wants to make her father proud, and she's willing to risk the ultimate shame and humility to and disownment because she wants to protect him. And so it's this idea that she's living in a world where she doesn't fit the mold, but she's desperate to and ill-equipped to ever succeed. It's the same thing that we migrated over to Hiccup. And I feel that myself. I feel like that was part of my life journey. It's like maybe when you realize that you can stop trying to change who you are and live up to other people's expectations, maybe you embrace that thing that makes you weird or different or you see as a weakness, because it might be a strength in disguise. It might be that thing that allows the world to change around you.
So beautiful. And yeah, please applaud. To me, I find this movie to be radically optimistic and generous, particularly in this political moment. This first movie was made in the Obama administration, the hope and change era, and it weirdly feels more relevant now because it models such generosity between characters. I don't know if I could name an antagonist in this movie, or a villain, I should say, other than like that big, beautiful beast at the end. But
it's his father, really, right? Like and in the father and son story, it's the father who can't understand the kid, who actually, once the kid's activity and secret life has been exposed, he's disowned.
He's disowned, yeah. And typically, breaking away and other, that guy is like a real turkey, basically the whole movie. And what I find so interesting and it's compelling about this movie is that his father so desperately wants to connect. It's such a generous portrayal of him. Some of those scenes where he's just like, now we've got something to talk about. This isn't going to be great. And one of the things I've experienced in my career is it's really hard to watch people in a fight for 2 hours. It's way better to watch two people trying to get along. And I feel like you understand that really well. As a screenwriter, first, do you draw when you write?
They're interchangeable. So I have to see the thing I'm going to draw or see the thing I'm going to write, and the words are just a replacement for the lines. But
you start with a drawing, like boarding it, or do you start with a computer?
Yeah, I'll often just sketch. I don't even draw on the computer, so I'm a pen and paper kind of guy. But yes, I will do combinations of sketches and like notes to myself. But I have to imagine the whole thing playing out. I have to imagine a scene playing out before I can write a word or draw a single panel. So I don't find my way through it in the way that Chris Sanders does. We're very different in that regard. But he's I think he's just more intuitive. His drawings are fresher. Mine tend to be very sort of deliberate and calculated in the same way that I write. I don't tend to meander when I write. It's always like with the point.
But the movie doesn't meander. The movie has discipline. I noticed that. I was like, oh, this is a movie made by an author or a writer. It's precise. They end a scene with a question and answer it at the beginning, and sometimes literally. I'm going off base. I'm just giving you compliments. But tell me about evolving. How did you arrive at that relationship where it's not, because I'm sure, I would imagine there would be drafts of this movie where dad was just a real turd for the entire movie, and it seems like it wound up being much more interesting than that.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation. Both Chris Sanders and I had a conversation with Gerard Butler when we first took over the movie, and at that point he had just been giving a lot of speeches and shouting, and I said we need to figure out an arc here. So try to think of your character as he was the hometown hero. He was the quarterback of the high school football team that won the giant match with the long-standing rivals. And your son's just not following in that line. And you want him to be the quarterback, and you want him to beat the ass of the rivals. Turns out he's dating the quarterback of the other team. like that's what you have to deal with. And so there's this, it's a betrayal. It's a failure to live up to expectation, but there's also a moment of learning. And that's really what's so pivotal about the character, is that in this push and pull of love and expectation, the father actually has the capacity to redefine for himself what leadership and what strength is, and come to see his son as an enlightened leader of a new and better way forward. And I think it's that strong opposition that he provides for Hiccup through half of the story, complemented by, that humbling moment when he realizes that I was so wrong and you were right, and I'm so sorry. That it's cathartic for me, because I was in my teenage years not very respectful to my father, and he was pretty judgmental of me, and so we had this back and forth, and it led to a couple of big blow-ups, and then he passed away when I was 19. So I never had that moment to iron it out, and to see Hiccup hear those words, "I'm proud of you," is like cathartic. And I guess that's the therapy for me personally. But I think it infuses that relationship with a sense of truth that isn't just, story structure and crafting
No, it's
characters.
not math. It's not math. And what I find really interesting is that it's you guys imagine that character as someone who's unwaveringly loves his son. As a matter of fact, that's his tragic flaw, is that he loves his son so much, it's going to force him to change. It's, of course, going to change all of his political attitudes. And I find that a fundamentally really generous point of view. And I think it extends to the rest of the cast. That, like, basically everybody who's a big turkey to Hiccup by the end of the movie is someone who's his ally.
Mm. Yeah. And ultimately, I think that's why in the years that have passed, when I do meet rabid fans of How to Train Your Dragon, inevitably they are those same outsiders that kind of deal with the reality that they're cut of a different cloth, and they're embarrassed for those traits that make them outsiders, and yet they're somehow emboldened by watching this movie and seeing a character who just stuck true to them and managed to change the world. And so I think that's a sort of hero that we don't get to see as much, I think, in mainstream movies, and it seems to touch people, regardless of gender, regardless of culture.
Absolutely. Tell me about what you learned on this picture. Like you said, you were a rookie in some ways. In many ways, not a rookie. Accomplished screenwriter, documentarian. You've made 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm probably missing one. Plus Mulan, 5 iconic animated pictures that are all Hall of Fame, excellent movies. But obviously, you're like, your boots are muddy. You're out there. It's drizzling for days, and then you're working with unbelievable collaborators. Bill Pope, you listed your costume designer. I thought did an unbelievable job. Tell me about, like, what's the thing you're going to take into the next picture that you learned on this one?
I think the biggest one was as soon as we started rolling cameras, day one of principal photography. I felt all eyes were upon me, and even though I apologized before we shot a single shot, I just said, "Look, I get it. I am the rookie here. You're all accomplished. You've got stellar careers. We pulled together the best we could. I will try not to get in your way. I will try to provide you everything you need. Know that I'm a quick study, but also know that I know my limitations." The one thing I can promise you all is that at the end of the day, you're going to be proud of this movie, because we've all worked on movies where we put in lots of effort and lots of sacrifice, and the thing is embarrassing. It's not going to be that case. But as a result, I felt like I need to be really sharp. I need to be, just constantly on and kind of on top of everything. And I quickly realized that the best thing I could do, once we had blocked and rehearsed and we had our sets, we had our costumes, we've answered all the questions about backstories and everything we could do to fill our actors with as much knowledge as they needed about their characters. What I quickly discovered was, now I need to step back. Now you hand the scene off to these actors and you let it develop. You let it find its own cadence and rhythm, and maybe lines drop away, maybe new lines come in. and there's this spontaneity that happens. And Bill Pope was great about this because he just said, now's the moment that you forget the 300 people on either side of the camera and you watch for truth. Because if you don't get it, you won't have it in the edit room, 5 months from now. Yeah. And this set won't be here next week. So you need to make sure before we move on, you've found that moment of truth. And that was the biggest learning curve for me, because coming from animation, we control everything.
You can fix that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when it came to the actors, I mean, we would record the same line however many times, but in editing, we would cut up those lines and make our own Frankenstein version of the performance and then hand that to an animator who then brings their own intuition and control to it. So everything was controlled. And this was a moment where it's you prep and you prep and you prep, and then you hand it over and remain nimble, because something might be happening and you need to move the camera and get the lights over here. But it was all about reacting to the authenticity that the actors were bringing to it, and
the spontaneity is like the thing you get on set. Yes. That is like really, really hard in animation, and it happens on set all the time. Your job is to shape it and turn it into something. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was movement. So you're a student of movement. You come from the animation world, which is storytelling with movement, and I thought the way these characters moved was so designed. So I'm curious about how you accomplished that, how you talked about that with your performers, and how you allowed for the spontaneity and for them to guide their performances, obviously. But I thought it had a very, I don't know, I thought they weren't going through the motions. I thought they were bringing almost like a dance quality to the way they performed.
Yeah, I credit that to all of our collaborators. We had an amazing stunt coordinator named Roy Taylor. He worked with our actors at length, just building up their physicality, but also working out to all the choreography of the scenes. And then I think blocking it with Bill Pope and sort of figuring out what aspects of the set we were going to incorporate into the movement of the scene, and making sure that the movement was always driven by the characters and by the story that was unfolding. And then we had a really responsive and amazing camera operator on the A camera, Karsten Jakobsen, I think, or Jensen Jakobsen. But he was incredible because he would always find a way of dancing with them. So whatever the choreography was, he was right there, always finding the sweet spot for the composition. And I think we spent quite a bit of time kind of going through the scenes and the shot structure of it. And we always had the animated movie as a reference to see if we were building upon it, or sometimes there was just a simplicity in the animated movie that we wanted to recapture. And also we had an amazing, and I know that you worked with him as well, Tom Wilton was a puppeteer who operated Toothless. He had a foam head and body, and he and his team of puppeteers would be the dragons on screen, which was incredible because they weren't just providing an eye line. They were embodying the entire performance of the creature. These are the people who did stage productions of like The War Horse or The Life of Pi.
Every puppeteer in England was on The War Horse. One was like left hindquarters, the other one's the right hindquarter, the understudy to the front forward neck. It's amazing.
Incredible. Yeah, they're incredible. So it really was just a well-coordinated effort of which I was part, but I certainly wasn't steering it all the time.
Right. But in my experience, having a performance from that puppet team for the actors to act with is just like a total game changer, because it goes from like, I'm doing it in the mirror, like I'm doing it as a results oriented thing, and I'm being in the scene with this being that's there is like totally, like, I'm sure you had to do this once in a while with like them going to like a blank nothing, because of this or that. The puppet got tired, whatever it was. And like in the edit suite, like it's not the same. They just like, they go dead in the eyes.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely. They brought so much. And they also really inspired the animators who then took on the scenes, but they had kind of a first draft of what the movement was. And you could see where all of the subtle nuances had been placed and the responses from the human actor.
Right.
And so it gave them a really nice, strong jumping off point as well.
What was it like directing that animation performance? Because it's really interesting. Like half this cast is like a group of people in London, Montreal, whatever. And talk to me about how you talk to those folks about movement and character. It's not a one-to-one working with an animation crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely spoke my language. So I think when I met all of the artists and technicians at Frame Store, there was just an immediate shared love and ambition. They were taking on the whole movie. This isn't normally done. So Frame Store took on the entire film across their 4 studios. So London, Montreal, Melbourne, and Mumbai. And so there was a company pride to it.
Yeah.
But at the moment we sat down and started redesigning the creatures and trying to take the personality and the essence of the caricature from the animated movie and then migrating into something that was more photoreal and naturalistic, that just became a great discussion of lots of iteration, but always searching for personality. We didn't just want to present photoreal. We wanted to make sure that all of the individual attributes and abilities and personalities and silhouettes were intact, but in a realistic form. And I just think there was always a push. Like I just said, I hate going to see a big visual effects movie where there's a handful of shots that break the spell because they just got finished in a hurry, or they got finished by one of the side vendors who just didn't have the capacity to deliver at the same quality. I said, this is your movie. This is a Frame Store movie. So we cannot have a single dodgy shot in this film by the time. I'm like, that's our pact.
Yeah.
And I wish we had a few more weeks just to put a little more nuance on some of the less polished shots. But I think overall they did a really great job, and it's a feather in their cap. So I'm happy to champion them.
Absolutely. And it's an amazing characterful performance. The shout out to the plate unit for all of those flying shots. Is that something you guys like scanned that environment and built those digitally, or was there a proper aerial unit cruising around?
Yeah. And so we had there are several things about this process. Like I've watched so many behind the scenes documentaries and Project Greenlight and all that, like getting myself ready to direct a live action movie. I imagine by the time I finally got here, it was going to be all done on a blue screen stage.
Yeah.
So I wasn't prepared for the fact that we were actually going to pile into helicopters and fly around Iceland and the Faroe Islands and Isle of Skye and shoot aerial plates. That was amazing in itself. I didn't know that we were going to build as many sets as we did, and that was also amazing. But the interesting thing is, while they were shooting aerial plates of our favorite locations, they were also scanning all of those same coastlines and sea stacks and canyons, and then migrating them into the Frame Store pipeline so that they could create photoreal virtual versions of all of these places. So everything you see in the movie, there isn't a single aerial plate in the movie that isn't created. All of the aerial plates are reference for the shots that are in there. And then the very end, the main on ends credit sequence, that's kind of a best
aerial
of
unit.
Yeah, best of aerial unit. So the idea was to try to make them indistinguishable from actual aerial plates, and I think they did a great job.
I think they accomplished that, and while also creating the kind of the pace and movement that those sequences require, you would have had to like speed up a bunch of plates and it would have looked insane. So I think that's a great technical achievement. And last question is, this movie has how do you imagine this movie in relationship to the one that you and Chris made in 2010? Is it a diptych? Is it, and how do you think of them as a single piece? It's one of the things that's so hard in a movie about drawing. Like one of the no-nos in cartoons, you never trace a drawing. It takes the life out of it, right? And so how did you make this without disengaging? The reason you don't trace a drawing is you stop looking. So how did you make this movie and continue to use your eye and heart?
I think it started from the very first conversation with Universal, because they were the ones who approached me about kicking the tires on a live action reimagining. And I I said, well, are we talking about a different timeline, different characters, something inspired by How to Train Your Dragon, or maybe a little more faithful to Cressida Cowell's books? And they said, no, the story of that first animated movie, but with live action bells and whistles and everything we can bring to it. So it got me thinking. After I called John Powell, our composer, and I said, talk me out of it if you think it's a bad idea. He saw the same potential, which is it could be a love letter. It could be a hug to all of those that had embraced and grew up with those animated movies, but also would open it up to a whole new audience. So if we do it with love and respect, there's something there. And he said, if you're in, I'm in. And so it became kind of the task of looking at a movie that I'm quite proud of, and I'm really proud of the team that put it together, but also wondering where we could have embellished. And so there were things like, not all of it made it onto the screen. There were ideas where I wanted to sort of push and expand in different ways, but it really was just kind of adding fat back onto a rather lean structure. So where additive, it made sense. And like we thought, we could expand on the mythology of the place, find out why this particular tribe was housed on that island in the first place, what brought them there, what's their mission, and then some of the underserved characters, giving them a little bit more backstory, a little bit more tension and dynamic depth in the character interactions. So Astrid in particular, she just felt like a character. I wanted to know more about her. Where did she come from? What was her ambition? Why does she have such a tense relationship with Hiccup? And
right,
what does
I had nothing.
Yeah. So and what does she stand to lose when she does side with him, as well as sort of fully embracing the live action aesthetic, which we chased in the animated movies. And we brought in Roger Deakins. We wanted to sort of reference something that sat on the line between animation and live action, but here we could go full bore. And that was, all of those presented opportunities where I felt like we could be additive and still faithful to the animated movie, but not in a way that would attempt to replace it. Because that's my beef with live action remakes, is they tend to replace or try to replace the animated movie with something that feels less than, less special, less filled with wonder. And I wanted this to sit alongside as another interpretation of the same story.
Well, you've made something entirely singular. It looks and feels like nothing else. It's got a big, beautiful heart. I cried my little eyes out. Let's give it up one last time for Dean DeBlois.
And thank you, Phil. Thank you.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share, subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America.